Before Jesus, John was just a fisherman. But then Jesus showed up, and one invitation changed everything. John walked with him. He was his friend, and he heard Jesus teach. He watched miracles happen with his own eyes. After Jesus ascended, he kept preaching, kept writing, kept pointing people back to Jesus. Thousands of years later, we're still reading the words of a man whose life was completely changed, all because he walked with Jesus.
All right, we are finishing up our series in John. It was just a short series. The next series we are going to dive into next week is talking about your mess and my mess and how the church fits into the mess that we've created in our lives, and that it's okay to have a mess in church. So that's what that's going to look like. But let's talk about John. Remember, 2 weeks ago, we kind of went back and we said, okay, there's this idea, this young John. We met him. He was hot-headed. He was impulsive. He was confident, and he was wrong a lot of the time. He was a son of thunder, which was not so much as a compliment as maybe we thought it was when you read it. You're like, that's an amazing title. That'd be a great tattoo. Not so much. Son of thunder is not something you really wanted to, is because he just really would slam the door hard on people. Remember, the Samaritan village, they really said no to Jesus, and his question to Jesus was, Lord, maybe we could just call some fire down. Maybe we just take care of them by burning them all up because they don't want to jump in on what we're doing here. There was no process. There was no conversation. He was just thinking total destruction. Now, some of you may be thinking, yeah, that's okay, right? You might be like, okay, I'm like that. Or you may have married someone like that. Don't raise your hand. We don't need to see that. And then some of you are so quiet because you're just not sure if that's you or not. Someone will tell you if it is. Don't worry about that. But last week, we were in the middle of his life. Pastor Josh talked about middle-aged John, the Last Supper, and leaning on Jesus' chest, and just that proximity and how close he was. And then we keep coming back to this theme that it wasn't so much the disciple who loved Jesus, it was the disciple whom Jesus loved. Now today we are in the last part of this, and this is older, very older John. The neat thing about older John is it preaches way different than younger John, and even middle John. You see, what we learn from John is that direction matters. One builds your identity on performance, and the other builds it on grace, depending on your direction. And we see that with John's life. At this point, he's in his 80s. Don't raise your hand if you're in your 80s, but I know some of you are. You've seen a lot of life. You've lived a lot of life. To feel the weight, I want you to know what his eyes had already seen. He was a teenager when he first met Jesus. He was a young man at the cross. He was in the room at Pentecost, which Billy talked about earlier this morning. That's just in the first decade, really. He watches the church explode, go from a group of 12 guys to 3,000 to exploding. Now, I want you to remember this, that when he heard news, as he aged, he would hear news about people, about friends, about things that happened. And when you heard news, it was someone who would come and say, hey, this is what happened. It was by courier. It wasn't by a text. It wasn't a Google. It wasn't Fox News, CNN, whatever your preference is. It wasn't that mode. It took time, but there was weight associated with it. At one point, he hears that Stephen was stoned in the streets, that his brother James was executed by the sword. Think about this. He buried his brother, and he kept preaching. In 64 AD, Rome burned down. Nero, by all means crazy, blamed the church and went after Christians. It's not biblical history, that's secular history. It says that the church was persecuted so bad that Christians were torn apart by dogs, that they were crucified, that they were covered in pitch and set on fire to light Nero's garden parties, human torches. And John was hearing these stories, and these were friends of his. These were people that he He taught, most likely, interacted with. And then he hears this news. Peter was crucified. Paul was killed. And now we're at about 70 AD. Jerusalem falls, temple burns. It's gone, stone by stone. And a little bit later, think of this. Put you in this spot where he is. Pompeii is burned, covered in volcanic ash. He hears that from a courier, most likely. And then there's a new emperor in Rome, and he basically says, all right, John, you get out of here. I'm going to put you on an island. And while John's on that island, he writes the craziest book in the world. It's called The Revelation. We're not going to talk about that this morning, but it's there. He writes his book. But at this point, he has outlived every other apostle. Think about how lonely that would be for him. Every single one. He's most likely one of the very last eyewitnesses of Jesus' circle and Jesus' miracles. This man, he lived long enough and he lost enough to earn the right to be bitter. Have you ever thought that? That life has been long enough, hard enough, whatever enough that, you could be like, yeah, I have every right to be bitter. Kind of that justification process that we have in our minds sometimes. I think we've met people like that, if we're not people like that. Sometimes that happens slowly. We become people like that over time. Remember this. Time doesn't heal people. Time reveals people. Age doesn't automatically make you wise. Sometimes age just turns the volume up on who you already are. Some people get softer. Some people get sharper. Same wrinkles, different finish. Same wrinkles, different finish. So here's your question for you this morning. It's what is forming you right now? Is it fear? Is it success? Is it disappointment? Is it your phone? Is it your politics? Is it your wounds? Is it your habits? Or is it your Jesus? Because whichever voice gets repeated the longest stops being a voice and it becomes your identity. Old John didn't happen by accident, and neither will you. History says that at the end of his life, he was carried into church. Couldn't walk, he was carried into church. We're going to pick up in Ephesus, city of Ephesus. And remember, we've talked about this recently. It was a big Roman city. It was very intellectual. It was like a spiritual marketplace where things were being sold. There was a teacher nearly on every corner. There was an idea competing for attention and money all over the place. They were selling this idea that there's this secret knowledge that will save you, that performance will save you, that the smarter you are, the more enlightened you are. And then we look back and we see John after Jesus, who could flex. Think about this guy. He had 60 years of theology. 60 years of theology taught from the master. And he's in that city and he cuts through it with one sentence, and its sentence is this. And this is the only scriptures we're going to read today because they're so heavy and they are so meaningful. It says, we love because he first loved us. Remember, young John, he built his identity on his intensity. Some of you probably can relate to that. But not old John. He builds his identity on grace. Sometimes I think we still get it backwards, though. We focus on our career, our bodies, our bank accounts, our politics, our followers count, our wins. Some of you need to realize that you are not loved because you're valuable. You're valuable because you are loved. Some of you have been in church for 30, 40, 50 years. And some of you are still trying to earn what Jesus already bought and paid for you. Can I give you just a hint? You're not that good. You'll never get there. It is by grace you have been saved. Some of you aren't sure why you're here. Like, I just came. For you, I have this. Christianity doesn't begin where you finally get your act together. So often we want to get everything perfect before we come to God. It begins when you let down your performance and you accept what Jesus did for you. And some of you, you're prodigals, and you're doing the math in your head. You're constantly doing the math on, am I allowed there? Am I allowed here? You're just trying to figure out where you fit. For you, I want to tell you this. You don't have to clean up before you come home. You don't have to clean up before you come home. The cleaning happens at the feet of Jesus. Verse 20, that same chapter, 1 John chapter 4, says, if anyone says, I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. You know what I love about this? Is that John is old enough that religious language doesn't impress him anymore. He doesn't care. He's just like right out there. You're just a liar. He's not holding back. He's got one test. The test is not attendance. It's not Bible knowledge. It's not worship vocabulary. It's none of those things. It's love, shown in patience, forgiveness, gentleness, and truth without cruelty. The church does not prove Jesus by winning arguments. The church proves Jesus by loving impossible people. And we have impossible people in this room. Some of you are those impossible people. Don't point. Don't pull out your phone. Don't do any of those things. So often, churches, they find the people that are impossible. Instead of helping, what churches do is they destroy them. John finds this so wrong. He actually finds the hard-to-love ones and says, love them anyway. There's no fear in love. Perfect love drives out fear. Verse 18. Let's go back to young John. Well, young John, he feared the outsiders. Remember? Burn the village. Old John loves the outsiders. Same man. What we learn from that is that fear shrinks and love opens. Fear builds walls. Love builds tables. Fear sorts into tribes. Love makes a family. Now back to John. He's old. He's in Ephesus. He's the last surviving apostle. He's the last eyewitness of that circle, of the miracles of Jesus, most likely. And Jerome tells us that he was too weak to walk in. He couldn't walk into church. So what did they do? They carried him. They carried him into church. And history tells us this. This is not biblical. This is history. It says that every week he would say the same words when he showed up to church. It was, little children, love one another. And then finally someone asked him and they said, teacher, why do you always say this? And John responded and he said, because it is the Lord's command. And if this alone is kept, it is enough. Think about this. 60 years, one sermon left. He's got one sermon. The kid who wanted to burn a village off the map ended up in his life unable to stop talking about love. Religion is a weird thing. A lot of people don't understand religion, and I'm probably one of those people. When I was young, I ran into religion before I ran into Jesus. And not really that I was looking for religion, I just ended up in a very religious group of people. That stunk. I'm going to tell you why. Because there was a rule for everything. There was a rule for the rule for the rule. And I don't really like rules. So that didn't go well. Everything was based on performance, on what you can do and how you do it. You had to look the right way. You had to speak the right way. There was always someone keeping score. Can I tell you something? That is not Jesus. That is not Jesus. That is religion. The funny thing is that because of who I was, religion really didn't know what to do with me, because at heart, and everyone knows this, I'm a rebel. You don't see me as a rebel, but I am a rebel. I had way too many questions. I questioned everything. Well, why would you do that? And then I would study Scripture to argue why we would do that or why you wouldn't do this, and I was young. And then I was way too acceptable of people, because I would go back to this book that John wrote and say, well, he said, love everybody. Love everybody. And what I realized is that religion can make you look changed without actually changing you. And I think that's sad. Because the truth of our faith is that Jesus changes you. That Jesus changes you. So one of the reasons that this church looks the way it does and why it's built the way that it was built is because we never wanted people walking in and feeling like, oh, I've got to clean up before I can come to church. It was never our intent. We welcome real people with real questions, and we're trying to figure out what's going on with grace and truth and that tension between as we talk through things and we grow in our faith together. Let's go back to John. He changed so much in time. It wasn't that it was a personality change. It wasn't a personality adjustment. This is not just, oh, he got old. He mellowed with age. That was not what was happening. This is Jesus patiently over 6 decades turning the Son of Thunder into the apostle of love. That's what it is. But it costs something. Of all the disciples, John is the one who stood at the cross, the only one of the men who didn't run. Back to John, think about this. He watched the blood of Jesus hit the dirt. He heard Jesus say, Father, forgive them. And we have to see that his life was changed because of the cross and because of Jesus. The cross forms you. The cross formed John slowly, sometimes painfully. Sometimes it's over years' time. Sometimes there's disappointment, there's failures, there's all of those things. But if we look at the after Jesus John, we see that his life didn't get softer because his life got easier. I listed the loss. I listed all of the hurts that he had seen. His life actually got harder as he aged. The reason that John got softer was because that his grace got deeper. Now, enough about John. It's time for you. It took John 60 years. Think about that. If you add 60 years to your life right now, I don't know where that puts you. But it took him 60 years. So often we feel like we're behind in the process. This is one of the inner circle. This is the one whom Jesus loved. 60 years. So you're in that process somewhere. And sometimes in that process, you can be tired. My encouragement to you is to just keep walking. Keep walking. And then sometimes in that process, you get where your edges become a little bit sharper and you become a little bit more cynical as you age. And that may be scary. because you know that that's probably not the way of the gospel. It's totally the way of the world. Just keep walking. Some of you are probably stuck, is my guess, in a room this size. Some of you aren't sure where your faith is going, and it feels like you're just in like mud, and you can't get to the next step. Keep walking. Keep walking. Because Jesus forms people over decades, not over a weekend. Yeah, we have great weekends. We have great church services, but you are formed over decades. It takes time. I used to think everything was straight up. It actually progress looks more like this. It takes time, it takes discipline, it takes effort, it takes failures. So for a step this week, one thing this week, not 5 because that's too many for us to get through. Name your village. Remember what John wanted to do with that village? He wanted to burn it. If you're human, you probably have someone in your life, in your past, that you've maybe not wanted to burn, but you have written off. Where you've said, yeah, that'll take a miracle. That'll be the day. You know the words that you use. And as I've spoken that, someone probably just came to mind. Someone that you've quietly written off. Maybe it's family, maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's a coworker that's just been a royal pain. This is the person that young John would have called fire down on. Well, here's my challenge for you this week. One concrete act of unsolicited kindness. Really quiet in here. We could make it 2. Not a confrontation. That is not what we're looking for. Not even a big conversation. Don't try to fix the whole thing. One act, no agenda, a text maybe, a real prayer for their good, that they are blessed. Sometimes when we want to burn a village, our job is to go love it. And if you start that pattern right now in your life, what will God do in the next 10, 20, 30, maybe even 60 years? If you change your pattern from being cynical, from being bitter, to wanting that village to burn, to taking steps of actually loving and helping people, what will that look like? 60 years with Jesus took John everything he knew and pressed it into 3 words. Love one another. That's it. 60 years. That's it. And it wasn't because he ran out of things to say. I think it's because he figured out what really mattered most as he aged. The fire was never the point. What God builds after the fire, that's the point.
Before Jesus, John was just a fisherman. But then Jesus showed up, and one invitation changed everything. John walked with him. He was his friend, and he heard Jesus teach. He watched miracles happen with his own eyes. After Jesus ascended, he kept preaching, kept writing, kept pointing people back to Jesus. Thousands of years later, we're still reading the words of a man whose life was completely changed, all because he walked with Jesus.